Hello everyone, it's GigaBeef here, and today we're looking at how I made just under 24 million rubles in 5 days of pretty regular Tarkov. This was an experiment to track where the money came from between raids, scavs, hideout, and importantly Bitcoin in this particular wipe. To some of you, this will seem like an enormous amount of money, and to others, it won't sound like much at all. But although it's certainly possible to make more than this in the same time period, there are specific reasons why I ran the experiment in this particular way. Basically, playing normally and not sweating it too hard. Before we get too bogged down in the details, let's take a look at the overall results. Very broadly, PMC Raids and the Hideout were really similar with nearly 10 million each, and this is partly because some of the PMC raids went really well, but we'll address this a little bit later. Scav Runs added another 5 million to the total though, and given how easy they are relative to real PMC runs, this does confirm the power of using these to your advantage economically speaking. In the Hideout, the elephant in the room is of course the Bitcoin farm, which in line with the IRL price has skyrocketed this wipe. Bitcoin in-game has always been tied to the real-life price in some way, and although BSG have ratcheted down both the ratio between Tarkov's Bitcoin and the real one in the past, as well as increasing the Hideout production time massively due to skyrocketing prices, given the new all-time highs were back to around 900,000 rubles per coin again. I moved to 50 cards a while back, spending most of my money on about 25 GPUs, which put me all the way down to 6 million rubles, and that process of building back up was what partially inspired me to do this test in the first place. So, of the Hideout, Bitcoin was 71% of it. Yep, that is a lot. I collected 8 Bitcoins in total for an average of 862k, which netted nearly 7 million overall, 29% of all the rubles acquired in this experiment. So yeah, Bitcoins are obviously pretty crazy right now, but GPUs are also extremely expensive, and you do need to find that final labs item to even unlock access to the third stage, which allows 50 rather than 25. That being said, 25 cards is still pretty good, as you get a coin about once every 20 hours versus once every 13 hours with 50 due to the diminishing returns of the farm. This left 29% of the Hideout gains across all of the other modules, which was 2.8 million across the 5 days. This was surprisingly low, and to be totally honest, I thought that it would be more than this. I have my Hideout completely maxed at this stage except for the Intel Center level 3 because you need one of the 2 labs only items that I haven't found yet, but it does start making money fairly early on, not to mention the stat buffs you get from the gym, air filter, shooting range, Hall of Fame and library that make it worthwhile anyway even outside of the monetary gains. As part of the test, I did track how many times I went into the Hideout to do stuff very broadly, and overall I had 23 Hideout sessions, which typically are only a minute or two cycling around between the different modules. On average then, doing things in the Hideout generally paid 122k per time that I visited. Other than overnight where 7 or 8 modules needed attention, I tended to leave 2 or 3 things to sort out before going back in there during the day, so it wasn't like I was min-maxing it the entire time. What I wanted to simulate here was a more casual or realistic approach to the results, as true Hideout mains who are at their PC all day that can collect and restart crafts the moment they are done will be doing this anyway, and incidentally will also make more money than I did during the tests, but those of you who are not totally sure if it's worth it won't be going to anywhere near the same effort. I figured that it would be counterproductive to show here's how much you could make if you build the Hideout, sit in there all day, pile up 50 piles of meds to sell en masse, study the market charts and offload them at peak prices, etc, because most of you just won't want to do that. Overall then, I still think it's worth doing. We're talking just under 3 million rubles over the 5 days, but it wasn't quite as much as I'd hoped for. Just for reference, crafts that I tend to focus on is making and selling moonshine using the sugar barter and super water from the water collector module. In the nutrition unit, I generally try to make water rations when kek tapes are around 20k, as you can get Salewers bartered for 15,000 rubles this way, as well as making slickers to turn into scav vests. These can be used in the lavatory for Ripstop alongside Aramid, which are both okay for money, although this is only relevant after you have enough GAC class 5 plates created via the TacTac and AACPC crafts. In the med station, pile of meds are usually the best, followed by SJ6, but you can also make things like CMS as well if prices are crazy at the time that you're looking. In the workbench, green gunpowder, DVDs to circuit boards, PP ammo and yellow pliers to red pliers are all decent depending on what prices are doing at the time and how long I want the craft to be. I tend to run the PP one overnight as it's a little bit longer than the others. I also ran the cheapest scav case, which cost 2,500 rubles, because although it's not necessarily the most profitable, common wisdom generally states the 95 case as this one, the more expensive runs are subject to pretty extreme swings in variability, whereas the 2.5k is a very steady money earner. This often provides well over 10 times the return on investment and can be run 3 times faster than the next quickest case. Next up, let's move on to the Scav Raids, which provided 5 million of the total. I started with a fence rep of 4.7, so I'm not maxed either, and my usual strategy is to exclusively scav on factory because this gives the best bang for buck in terms of your actual IRL time. This allows you to play more PMC raids, as if I have the time to play a proper game, I'd probably rather do that on my PMC than spending time playing scav. On the Scav Raids themselves, I split these down into two types. Proper Scav Factory, where I was looking to loot the weapons boxes, other Scav bodies, and avoid dying, which usually takes a couple of minutes, and Scav Factory run-throughs, where I was taking the initial loadout and sprinting to the exit, usually the camera bunker door. On average, I made 330k out of regular factory scav and 160k from scav run-throughs, because you do often spawn with labs cards, stims, gingy keychains, and other valuable items that boost up the total quite a lot. This is one of the reasons why I suggest Scav Factory speedruns if you're looking for stims for the quest samples, as your initial scav loadout can spawn any of these and are a large part as to how I get it done usually, but this means that you want to churn your initial scav loadout as many times as possible. If you are time poor, the run-throughs are extremely efficient, especially if you have something else to do while the game loads in, as you only spend about 10 seconds in raid, and then anything from 0 time if you sell to fence, or prioritizing a few high-value items to list on the flea and selling the rest to the ordinary traders. I was interested to see how selling to fence worked out, so I did another 10 Scav Factory runs just to get an idea. On these, selling to fence worked out at an average of 117k just using the base loadout, and selling to the flea first for items that are highly valued and then trade a second came to 204k instead. So typically you're taking a hit of around 40% selling to fence rather than optimizing it a bit post raid. If you have the stash space, you can even do this collectively after 3 to 4 raids rather than doing it after every extract to save a bit of IRL time. One thing to note is that you can still get a run through with factory scavving. What determines this is whether you extract within 7 minutes of the raid starting, not when you spawn in. For this reason, if you have anything particularly valuable such as a labs card, you'll need to wait until the timer is below 13 minutes on factory, otherwise your loadout will lose its find in raid status and you'll only be able to sell to the traders. Finally on raids, I played primarily on streets, making just under 10 million in total. I was doing this alongside the RPD video that I recently put out, but the thing about streets is that there is high value loot all over the place, and in many cases I could use the BTR. This allowed me to move a large proportion of the high flea value or heavy rare items across to carry on looting the map before leaving properly, amplifying the amount of loot that I got out of any one individual raid. Before the experienced players jump on me and say that in this section I could have improved a lot, do bear in mind that outside of the wipe month I only play for 3 sessions a week for roughly 3.5 hours. So in the time of the test, I played a total of 11 raids on streets, netting 900k per raid, with 9 survives and 2 deaths, which I don't think is too bad. Generally speaking, I stayed around the northern area of the map, looting Relaxation Room and the apartments next door, the marked room in the factory area, which was surprisingly uncontested, the military academy where Kolontai spawns sometimes, as well as sections of Pinewood Hotel, Klimov Trading Center, the Beluga restaurant, and the Terror Group offices and the apartments around the corner. Bringing a green flare also helps a lot, as it gives you one extra exit, which is often quite convenient if a little bit exposed. Although I could have done the raids faster to net more cash overall, in a sense it didn't really matter how much I made from the PMC raids, because that only matters for me specifically and my playstyle anyway. This number will be different for each and every one of you depending on where you play, how you like to loot, and even simple winning and losing streaks will make a huge difference to this overall figure. The more important thing here is how it fits into the context of the rest of the numbers to give an overall sense of where the money sources came from. The very last note is other. This was simply things like buying money cases and completing Gunsmith Part 23 that didn't really belong in any of the other categories. So there you have it, a full breakdown of how I make my money in Tarkov, where it comes from specifically in a very average week, and after all, we're 24 million richer, which is pretty cool. Since finishing the experimentation, I've accrued yet another 10 million on top to over 70 now, and I think the ease of gaining money in general this wipe is influenced a lot by the price of Bitcoin. With many players getting a regular influx of cash often, this has pushed up all prices, so in fact it makes selling what you get in raid more valuable as well, basically doubling up the effect if you're looting well. The cool thing about this is that it kinda helps everybody, not just those with the farm. So as usual, a big shout out to all my patrons, and as always, have fun in your raids.